and then we'll be good to go. Okay. So I am joined here by Katie Billings and Sharon Meacham. They both work in our learning services department, and I'm going to give them an opportunity to talk about the great work that they're doing at the school. And if you've joined us for other meetings before, we'll save about half of this meeting time for questions. And if you have questions, you can certainly just ask them at that time or put them in the chat. Either is fine. Pamela, who is our Director of Student Services, is not able to join the call today. So I'm going to start out by actually just giving you kind of an overview of the work of, or the work of the Director of Student Services and kind of what that work involves. So the big chunk of that has to do with a lot of coordination of outside services. So we have students in our community that are maybe receiving tutoring or OT services or some kind of service that is in supplement to their regular general school life. And for the most part, well, in a typical year, I should say, we encourage those services to be brought into the school. So whether it be a tutor or an OT or someone else that's delivering services, they'll come into the school and do that work with the student. Maybe in some cases, they will see that professional outside of the school, but the Director of Student Services really does a lot of work with coordinating those services and will work closely with parents to make sure that those are all in line and scheduled correctly and set up. She also does a lot of support around working with families that maybe are seeking or exploring having their child evaluated for something. Maybe they're noticing something in their child's learning profile that they would like to learn more about and are seeking an evaluation. She can, or that person, the Director of Student Services will work with the parent to explore that inquiry and set up opportunities to get certain evaluations. In some cases, she's also coordinating funding. So there are some families that are eligible for Title I funds or some other funding that pays for these additional services, typically through SPS if they qualify. So she, that role also supports and works on coordinating of that. And then the Director of Student Services does a lot of work around our SEL program, our social emotional program. So this year, Pamela's actually been teaching classes directly to students and has been videoing into individual classes and doing social emotional lessons with kids. But a big chunk of that work is really being providing expertise and training to teachers as they are navigating that work with their students. And that could be anything from supporting teachers around tools and strategies that they could use both broadly in their classroom with their entire class, or maybe they have certain children in their classes that need very particular support in the area of social emotional learning. And this role is designed to support people around training and support. So I'd say in overall, it's a big liaison role. It's working closely with parents and other professionals, maybe outside of the school, to make sure that your child has the learning supports and learning services that will help them grow and thrive in our program. I think I covered pretty much the overview of that role. If there are any questions about that, again, we can kind of dig into that a little bit more later. And I think Sharon would be able to elaborate on some of those areas of that role. But I think what I'll do now is I'm going to pass this off to Katie, who is our math specialist, and she'll talk specifically about her role in learning services. And so, Katie.
Hi, thanks, Ken. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's a interesting, busy week and time, so glad you're here. So yeah, I am the math specialist at Giddens, and that means a lot of different things, and I'll kind of talk you through my role and how I'm supporting kids. First of all, I actually am the math teacher for 1 or 2 grade levels each year because of our combined grade band structure, like K1 is together, 2-3 is together, and 4-5, 4th, 5th graders are together. And that works really well and fits with Giddens' mission and vision really well in almost all areas except for math, because it's just such specific content at a given grade level in math. So for example, this year I teach 3rd grade math. The 2nd graders stay with their teacher and their regular teacher, and they do math during math time. And then I take the 3rd graders and teach 3rd grade math so that they're all getting what they need. Last year I taught 4th and 1st. It's kind of a numbers game depending on kind of what grade band needs what support. So that's awesome to, not be a classroom teacher, but be very much in that mode still of teaching full-on classes. This year, actually, kind of just in response to this weird COVID year, I've actually added kind of a math specialist role, like specialist as in PE, music, Spanish, and now they have me for math, which has been really a lot of fun. And I think they were kind of like, wait, really? But it's been an opportunity to kind of extend the other work that they're doing and do some really project-based things and games and learn math in a very thematic and different way than they normally have in kind of their typical math time. And kids have, I think, gotten a lot out of it and really enjoyed it. So that's been fun, and we'll see where that goes next year with hopefully being back more in person. But that's been one of those silver linings, I guess, of COVID, is trying something new and having it work well. So I also am here as the math specialist to provide small group and one-on-one support for kids who need that outside of their regular math time. And sometimes that means kids who are really struggling and they're missing some fundamental skills or concepts in math. So I will work with them, again, either one-on-one or in a small group to kind of boost that. And that is often on Zoom right now because they're often at home. Kind of the opposite end of that is I'm also meeting with kids who need more of a challenge, who need to be pushed a little bit deeper in the math content than they're getting in their typical regular math classroom. So I kind of see the spectrum of kiddos who just need a little something extra or different or in addition to their regular math time. And we have a bunch of assistant teachers this year that we've hired to help support just staffing with COVID. And they're also providing tutoring for kids more than I can, because I can't get to everybody, but then I'm coordinating with them so that they are using instructional strategies that are really well researched and effective. Yeah, I kind of the third thing I'm doing is just supporting teachers with their instruction and their planning of their math lessons in their classroom, working with grade level teams to figure out, okay, what's the best way to teach this, or how are we going to adapt this so that it works online. We have a really great math curriculum called Bridges, which is very used widely in this area, both public and independent schools. And one thing I like about how we do it at our school is that teachers have a lot of flexibility to kind of use the curriculum, but extend it where needed or change it where needed based on what their kids' needs are. It feels very responsive. And I kind of enjoy getting to work with teachers on doing that work. And then I'll say kind of the last piece that I do is supporting some assessment work. So we have, at the beginning and end of each unit in math, kids do a pre and a post assessment. And I see that there's a chat, so I'll answer that in a minute. And then we collect that data as a whole school, and I kind of take a look at that with teachers, and we see, okay, how are we doing? Like, is there a certain strand of math that we're really struggling with as a school? What do we need to do to change that? Or are there just certain kids in a certain grade band that need extra support? What are we going to do to implement that? And sometimes that's more one-on-one. So for example, right now I'm working with a fourth grader who I've been tutoring in the morning several times a week because she has been just having a hard time accessing the work that her class is doing in math. Her parents have sought an outside evaluation and that is scheduled, but unfortunately sometimes those get scheduled months out. And in the meantime, there's a lot we can do here. So I did an assessment with her just of some basic skills, kind of figured out where she is. And now I'm meeting with her to fill in those holes and support her with her daily assignments, and also give feedback to the teacher, like, here's what worked well for her today. We use this app or we use this strategy. So if you can stick with that for her in the future and maybe other kids with similar learning profiles, that might be really effective. Yeah, so kind of across the board, whether a whole class of kids or a couple of teachers or a couple of kids, I'm working in kind of a lot of different ways to support math instruction. Let me just pause and take a couple questions. Ken, does that work?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So it says, is there flexibility for kids to move out of their classroom for math? My first grader is currently doing 3rd to 4th grade math. So this is a great question. And it's so, you know, I know it varies from school to school what the philosophy is. I would say our philosophy is we don't tend, so when kids need kind of an extra challenge or an extra extension, we do not typically put them in another math class that's an older grade. Instead, we try to provide opportunities that deepen the learning, or like deepen, or I guess the word is really application. We're teaching them to apply the skills that they've got at their grade level to more complex problems, but not necessarily accelerating them. Sometimes that just like I know of some schools, for example, where like, okay, kids will be actually doing math curriculum that's an entire grade above where their age is. And then sometimes like the standards and the expectations and even like the reading of the problems is actually not developmentally appropriate. So instead of actually just moving them up and accelerating, we try to deepen and apply instead. So not a lot of flexibility to actually move out of their math class into another math class, but support for meeting their needs within the math class, which I don't know. I hope they answered that question.
Can I just add, I think there's also like a philosophical underpinning to that move as well, just to add to what Katie was saying, which is, you know, we really want kids to feel strongly connected to their classroom community and the work that they're doing together as a class. So if they're studying, for instance, you know, fractions in math, for all kids to be able to participate in that, and then certainly be able to differentiate that instruction or that content for kids that maybe are showing up with more proficiency or just emerging in their understanding of that work, rather than sort of shift them out of their classroom community into another class. So.
And I think Dawn, I see, is asking, can you talk about what kindergarten math is like? So and this is actually not just kindergarten, it's all the grade levels. There's a lot of focus on conceptual development, games, visual models, pictures, manipulatives, making sense of what numbers are, making sense of what numbers mean. And that actually continues all the way up through 5th grade. I mean, obviously it gets more complex, but I remember a story from the kindergarten teacher at one point. She was sharing that her parents were concerned because the kids were coming home saying like, oh, we don't do math, like we just play games, which is actually not the case. Like they are doing math, and it's actually really rigorous thinking, but it is very engaging, and they like it, right? They think it's fun. So there's a lot of hands-on manipulatives. Sharon, you can maybe also speak to this, having previously taught younger grade levels in math, but yeah, I don't know if you'd want more specifics. Or there's not a lot of writing, you know, there's some for sure, and learning to form numbers and all of that. Number sense is huge in kindergarten, basic adding, basic counting to 100, but really focusing on like what the concepts are behind those instead of just like rote memorizing or anything like that.
I think there's a lot. Can you talk a little bit about? I feel like there's a lot of math discourse that happens
Yeah.
just partly because of the orientation of Bridges and helping kids build a really strong vocabulary in math speak, so to speak, and hearing other math thinking from other students. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, so math discourse and just talking about math thinking is really important and big in the states, in the Common Core state standards. Like there are mathematical practices involving like evaluating other people's reasoning, sharing your thinking, communicating it clearly. And that sounds very complicated, but in kindergarten can look like, okay, she says it's 7. I think it's 7 too because blank, or I disagree because blank, or I agree because blank. I notice, and so there's a lot of chatter, like it's not quiet. Often what it looks like is there's a mini lesson at the beginning, and I'm thinking again of a typical year with the teacher, and maybe kids are gathered on the carpet and the teacher's leading some sort of counting all together or a calendar activity or whatever the crux of the lesson is. And then they'll go off and they'll be doing some sort of practice with that skill or strategy with a game and manipulatives, drawings, something like that. And then often they'll come back at the end to kind of debrief and share and kind of drive home the main point of the lesson. Yeah, I'm happy to keep taking math questions now before we move on to Sharon, however feels good.
Why don't we move to you, Sharon, and then we can always circle back to math as well as we continue the conversation.
Sounds good. Hello, everyone. I am Sharon Meacham. I'm the literacy specialist here. And as Katie alluded to, I've also taught 2, 3, and 4, 5 here. So I've been a classroom teacher at Giddens, and now I'm a literacy specialist here. So I have a good handle on the curriculum overall. But my responsibilities now include many of the same things Katie was saying in her math specialist job. I am responsible for administering and analyzing assessments that happen periodically through the year, and then thinking about which students might need an extra boost, which students might need, support, and which students might need some extension. And then I work with teachers to think more about that, because a lot of that happens inside the classroom. We are lucky enough to have small class sizes, and teachers can really work with kids in differentiated small groups, one-on-one, and partnerships. There's a lot of that kind of work that happens in the classroom by the classroom teacher. I can also support that, whether going into the classroom again in a regular year. I spend all morning in classrooms during literacy blocks, helping with that kind of work. I also provide resources for teachers to do that kind of work when I'm not there too. The workshop model that we have is really great for that. In reading and writing, teachers do a mini lesson, kids practice independently. There's usually share at the end of it. And during that independent time, that's also a time for teachers or for me to take one child, a couple children, a small group of children, and work on a specific skill. Like I said, in a normal year, I'm in the classroom during the literacy block all morning long, different grade levels, different classes. And then in the afternoons, I pull small groups of kids to work with them on maybe something that a foundational skill that they don't seem to have yet, and they really need a second go at it. Or it could be an extension outside of the classroom. Right now I'm doing book clubs in first grade because we've noticed that we have a lot of really high readers in our first grade right now. So we've been doing kind of that in-depth comprehension work to kind of get to all those like deeper ideas. And then I'm also doing a lot of work with phonics and thinking about letter sounds and word parts, spelling rules. It kind of runs the gamut of everything that is literacy. So I'm phonics, I'm doing reading comprehension, reading fluency, word attack in their reading, and then even some writing as well, as far as applying those spelling skills. That tends to be more as we're getting into 2, 3, and 4, 5. ideation, organization of the writing. So kind of whatever they need at the different levels, thinking about that both in the classroom and as a pullout as needed. I'm trying to think if there's other things that I should mention. Did I forget anything?
Sharon, could you provide an overview of like what all the different curriculum pieces are that make up our literacy program?
Yeah, so from kindergarten through 5th grade, I'm thinking about mostly, we have a spelling program that we do words their way spelling in 2, 3, 4, 5. K1 has a different program called Wired for Reading, but basically that's the phonics. That's thinking about word parts, how words work, what are the rules for them, which words don't follow the rules, how can we keep track of that, sight words, that kind of thing. And then for reading, the classroom curriculum is a reading workshop, which comes out of Teachers College in New York. And it's the workshop model, having a mini lesson, the independent work time or partner group. There's often reading partners where they get that discussion piece in to get more into the comprehension. Kids do a lot of work with tracking their thinking when they're reading, which is so important, because it's not just about reading the words on the page. You need to be doing that work of thinking. What do I notice about this? What are the questions I have? What am I inferring about this? How can I describe this character? So that comes out a lot in the reading curriculum. And then writing, we also have writer's workshop, which is the same kind of model. And each grade band has certain units they do through the year, but there's a good mix of nonfiction writing, creative writing, a lot of ways to organize thinking and to kind of hit on all those different elements.
There's a question in the chat box.
Sorry.
No worries. What kind of training do the classroom teachers have on literacy-based learning differences?
A lot of the teachers have gone through specific training in literacy programs, and within that, they might learn about how to, extend and support and different learning challenges that kids have. And then that's also where I can be a resource for teachers who need it and to talk through specific things that they're seeing in their classroom.
And then Katie and Sharon, could you both just walk families through, you both mentioned assessment work. Can you just talk about what that looks like at the literacy level and the math level, and maybe like an example of each?
Yeah, I can start. So in math, the curriculum that we follow is split into 8 units. And so for each unit, there's a pre-assessment and a post-assessment. So teachers are getting a sense of at the beginning of like who's already got this, or who's got what parts of this content already mastered and who doesn't, and who, and then by the end, like how are we doing? Did we get it? Do we need to go back? Do some of us need to go back, etc. That continues. That is kindergarten up through 5th. I will say in kinder and first, it's a lot more like of an interview style with the teacher, one by one, meeting with each kid and asking them like, okay, show me how you're going to count these things. How many bears are there? And watching how they're counting them, and the teacher's taking notes on like, okay, are they counting actually the right number? Are they organizing them in an efficient way? So it's a lot of just observation in the younger grades instead of like written assessment. And then that switches kind of around like the second half of 1st grade into more written types of assessments. So there's a lot of focus on showing your thinking, explaining your strategy, and also getting the right answer. We don't do like the standardized national public school style tests. We don't have to do the SBA. We do one standardized one called the ERBs, I think just in 3rd and 4th grade, and that can maybe speak a little bit more to that. We're not this year. We haven't in a couple years because of COVID.
Yeah,
That's the only bigger, the like standardized thing we do.
yeah, it's the test itself is the CTP. It's put out by ERB, which is the same company that puts out the ISEE. And most independent schools use that because when children are applying into a sixth grade program, the ISEE is the test that most schools want submitted as part of an application. And so what Giddens has decided to do is across several years, third, fourth, and fifth, is to give children practice with that test so that when they do eventually take the ISEE, if they're going to be applying to an independent school, then obviously that would apply. So just everything from test comfort, understanding kind of how the questions are asked and how they're organized, the different categories of testing. And then additionally, you know, it is a standardized test. We're not a school that works heavily in that arena, but standardized tests always have interesting information to provide us with that we can look at and look for trends across our student population in terms of testing results. And I'm sure Katie or Sharon could elaborate more on how the school kind of digs into those test results and thinks about that. But yeah, that's the only standardized testing piece.
I would say that as far as how we use it, one of the main things we use that kind of testing for is to see trends overall. That actually is how we came up with a grammar unit in the 2-3 grade band. We noticed, hey, wait, you know what? Our kids are not scoring well in this area. We need to kind of amp that up a little bit. So that's mostly what we're doing. We don't take each individual child's score too seriously because it's not something we do often, and it's a whole new kind of situation for each kid to be doing. We really look for trends. Where do we notice holes in our own instruction? Oh, and do you want me to talk about literacy now? Is there, okay. We have 4 times a year, we do a spelling test that is based on the Words Their Way program. And as I'm actually like inundated with them right now because we're in the midst of that right now, and I'm looking through and sorting and seeing how we're progressing. And the way that works too is we're not looking at whole words and is the student spelling all the words correctly. We are looking at the parts of the words to think strategically about which word parts do students understand, where are the holes in that, and then that aligns to the Words Their Way program. So as we sort through this data right now, we might notice, oh, actually, these kids don't need these certain sorts and spelling lists. They need these. We need to shift them around, or we need to go back and look at these. Certainly the kids that I work with a lot for support, I'm going to be looking at this closely to think, okay, do we need to backtrack and do some of these, some more support work on certain word patterns? So that happens 4 times a year. And then there is a reading assessment beginning, middle, end of year. We do the Fontes and Pinnell reading record. So that's hitting a lot of things. And the students read a certain book. The teacher is marking which words they get correct, which words are incorrect, and then making notes about that. There's a whole system to it, but not just thinking about, did they get the word wrong, but how did they read it? Gives a lot of information. How are they thinking about those words? And then there's comprehension questions that go with it to see, okay, so maybe this kid can read every word in this book, but then now I'm asking them questions and they're having a really hard time responding. Now I know that's the place I need to focus. Or the other way around. Maybe they're getting tripped up a lot, but they actually have high comprehension. That's the kind of thing that maybe in their 4 or 5 book club, if we're noticing that their decoding skills are holding them back, but they actually have very high level thinking, that's where maybe all of a sudden we're switching to books on tape for a book club discussion, because it's not about the reading right then, it's about the discussion. And there's other places for them to get their reading. So there's a lot that goes into that as well. And then we also have a beginning, middle, and end writing sample, just to kind of have an apples to apples comparison, because many of our units are so different that we do it the same kind of writing, beginning, middle, end, to kind of see how organization, spelling, paragraphing, whatever the grade level is focused on.
Sharon, you reminded me that we also in math do a beginning and end comprehensive of the entire grade level's content in math. So usually at the beginning, if they're coming into first grade, they haven't, most of them do not score well on that at the beginning, and then they take the exact same one at the end and they show a lot of growth. So that exact same reason for the apples to apples comparison. If you're teaching a concept in math, is it integrated with other classes like Spark or language? I will say yes and no, to be honest. I think especially in my math sort of specialist units this year that's been specific to COVID, I have really tried to integrate it into Spark and other units that they're doing. Like, so for example, earlier, right before the election, I had fifth graders. And so our whole unit was on voting math. So the Electoral College math, voting rates, looking at voting rates over time and broken down by different populations like race, ethnicity, age, gender, et cetera, et cetera. So fun. The kids were so engaged, you know, they all knew there's this big election coming. And so what was so great is that the next day, we didn't know the final results, but they knew exactly what had happened. They knew like which states and how many Electoral College votes were needed left, and et cetera. So that was all tied into a Spark unit that they've been doing on voting rights. So they had learned about the history of voting rights very slowly expanding in this country, learning about voter suppression. And I think a lot of times there's not a focus on math in those Spark units, but this was a great opportunity to tie that in. In the K1 unit I did, it was at the very beginning of the year. So we just did a lot of survey questions to kind of build community. So they practiced with like, what's your favorite blank? So color, ice cream flavor, whatever. And then they counted kids' votes and then they graphed them, very basic graphs. Or do you like blank or blank? Do you like chocolate or vanilla? For kinder, it was really just two choices, and then showing and counting how kids responded to those two choices. And also in second and third grade, we've done a big focus on graphing. Our curriculum doesn't do a huge focus on graphing and data analysis, and that is really the way of the world these days and in the future, and I want to be adding that in, so that's been a cool opportunity. So I'll say, you know, sometimes it's not, like sometimes we're just learning ones, tens, hundreds, fractions, like some basic math concepts, but as much as possible, I am trying to tie that into other curricula that they're getting.
I would add too that sometimes it goes the other way. So the Spark curriculum might try to draw in some math that also complements what the Spark program is doing, and that kind of thing. You can go the opposite direction. I noticed a question about choosing books for book clubs. The classroom teachers work together very closely and do that. That is more them. I can help. They can consult me on what I think, but they really do that. I love that about Giddens too, that the teachers have so much freedom to kind of to guide their own curriculum. It depends on different grade levels. The most important thing is that students are reading books on their level. You have less choice in which books you pick in younger grades, because there's only kind of certain ones that work well for a topic. There's more freedom in the upper grades, I would say. But right now, the 2-3s are doing biographies and the biography book clubs, and the 4-5s are doing historical fiction book clubs. And in both grade bands, they're thinking a lot about having a wide range of topics, because the kids within a group are talking about their books, but then it's also nice to have different groups hear about what other groups are doing. So I know in the 4-5s right now, they're reading about World War II internment camps. They're reading about civil rights era. They're reading about the Wild West, one group has, and kind of that time period. So it's kind of all over the place. But then that makes for such a rich discussion. Sorry, I'm talking too much today. Within the class.
Can I add on, Sharon?
Absolutely.
My other hat sometimes is being a librarian, and it's so cool because the teacher team will like descend on the library where we have the book sets, and it'll be this whole long meeting of like, okay, I'm thinking of combining these kids and having them read this book because I know that this person enjoyed this one, and I'm thinking that that would be a good fit and an appropriate level of challenge for them, and that group dynamic might be really good. And now I'm thinking over here about these ones, and often they're in a book club with kids who are not in their own classroom, like in a different teacher's class in the same grade. And that I think is even this year on Zoom.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Which is cool. Just there's a focus on putting together not just like matching kids with kids and books that are a really good fit. So it's just kind of a cool process to see. It is very like homegrown. The teachers are very thoughtful about it.
And the books might change each time the unit is taught, because teachers will read the books with the groups and say, you know what, this one just didn't kind of work for us. Like kids didn't connect to it. We didn't really feel it. Teachers are always hearing about new books that other people love it. You know, they all have teacher friends who are recommending other books. And so it might be like, you know what, we don't want to do this one. We're going to do this one instead. Let's try this out. And then of course, there are ones that we love and we're like, oh, I get to teach this one again. So that's all part of it too, just what teachers really like reading, what they've noticed their kids really connect with. But that's a fun process overall.
Cam, had I answered your question about math and depth or acceleration? I didn't directly address it, but.
Yes, you did.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Can you, Sharon, or maybe it's both, but can you talk a little bit more about the process of learning to write over the range of grades? And just, I mean, I'm not looking for a specific answer, but I'm just kind of interested in understanding better, and particularly like how or if kids get exposed to different forms of writing.
Yeah.
And sort of start to play with them.
Yeah. So in the youngest grades, in K1, a lot of it is, you know, sounding out the words, trying best guess spelling. We're not, you know, we want them to not stop their ideas, right? So we don't want them to be so focused on how to spell a word and to just get out their ideas. They're doing pattern books, they're doing all about me books, they're doing kind of true stories from their lives, and they're just trying to kind of put words together, put sentences together, get the idea of a story. So that the focus there is a lot on kind of spelling and putting words together, but also just the idea of a story and how a story works, right? And a lot of that also in K1 takes place in the reading section of the day, right? Because you're thinking about what makes a story and then trying to put that into your writing. But of course, in K1, it's pretty basic. And they're just writing, you know, a few sentences at a time. 2-3 now, it's a little bit on, let's get production. Let's start amping up how many sentences we're having. Let's get a longer story. Within that, then they start talking about, okay, let's not have a then story. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. They start a little bit with the crafting, but that comes more in 4-5s. And now we're really about, how am I structuring what I want to say to best effect? There is a little bit of that in 2-3s. They are thinking about what is the heart of the story, is what they call it. What is the point? But developmentally, it's not so much until 4-5s when they can really boil that down. What I'm trying to say is this, and there's a way I can put this together to really get that across. And then within each grade band, there's always different units. Right now, the 2-3s are writing persuasive letters or essays about a cause that they believe in. There's, what did they do before that? They did letter writing before that. They did small moments before that, which is kind of true stories from their lives. They're going to do fairy tales later in the year, 4, 5s. And I'm thinking about 2, 3s, and 4, 5s mostly because I'm like, I taught all these units. They're reading often. This is a good thing to mention too. Often the writing is connected to the reading in some way because it helps to read some of that form before you try to do it. So as I mentioned, the 4, 5s are reading historical fiction, and then they're going to take a go at writing it, which is a lofty task. So they will be researching a time in history, thinking about a character, trying to put themselves in that character's position, writing diary entries from the point of view of somebody who may have lived in a historical time period. They're also doing a little bit of persuasive writing right now related to social justice issues. But it kind of, we have a whole bunch of different, we've done science fiction before, there's a whole bunch of different units. And a lot of that is because we know that there's a lot of different ways to write, a lot of different forms, a lot of different, techniques to know, as far as nonfiction writing, fiction writing, persuasive writing, descriptive writing. And that's every year we really look at that as in the course of a year, let's have all these different kinds of writing and let's come back to it each year so that, but in a slightly different way.
What access have the kids had to the library during this time?
So the library has been turned into an actual classroom for 5th grade. We have spread out basically into every available room in the building so that we could kind of follow those initial guidelines this past fall. So there is much more limited access. So what I've done is like take tubs of books to classrooms, and they just live in classrooms, and kids can read them from there. That way they're sort of in the class, but not switching amidst different classrooms. And actually it's probably time to update that now that you ask. So thank you. Of like, we know that actually COVID isn't traveling as much on surfaces, so we probably could open that up a little bit more. So yeah, the library is here. Like I'll have parents or kids email me or talk to me like, I need another good book. I really liked this one. Can you find me one? What author do you suggest? And I'll go grab it for them. I've kind of been the one that will come in on times when I know that the teacher is available and not teaching, or the kids aren't there, and grab stuff rather than people coming in and out. It's just a very odd COVID specific year. Typically they have library as a specialist, and they come and they do a read aloud and they'll check out books and that they can take home and back and forth.
How often do you review the books that you have in the library?
Like kind of do an inventory or like evaluate what I've got?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say each year, and not formally like full-blown formal inventory, but I'm constantly looking at improving the diversity of the authors that we have and the types of people that are represented in our books, and like weeding out things that are just no longer relevant, no longer correct, no longer appropriate, whatever it is. Really, we have a pretty great library budget. And so I'm constantly buying new books every year. It's like the best part of my job. And also like it is beautiful and large and still limited. So I'm constantly prioritizing like, actually, this hasn't been checked out in a really long time, or this is actually not really a good fit for kids right now. I'm going to replace it with something better. So I would say on an informal basis, sort of constantly, but big picture, like over the summer.
Are there any, on the math side, are there any sort of, I don't know, math projects or kind of along the lines of building, beyond kind of skills and applicate, maybe it's not beyond, but answer however you want.
Yeah, so I totally get what you mean. So yes, so for example, today in third grade math, the kids had been all remote for all of December, but we did a math project planning for making those borax crystal snowflakes. So I turned it into a math task of like, okay, so if we need first of all, how many, like trying to make it very open-ended and real world, how many pipe cleaners actually do you think we would need for our class to be able to make a snowflake? And that depends on a lot of things, like how big are the snowflakes going to be? There's a lot of decision making in that. And how many tablespoons of borax, and like, well, that depends on how much water, and it connects to the measurement volume unit that we've been doing. And actually how many kids are going to want to make the borax snowflake, and how many kids are going to want to make the pasta snowflake instead, and how many boxes of pasta are we going to need, that kind of thing. So they had done a whole project around like planning for this, with the promise that they would get to when they got back to school. And so today they were back at school for the first day since I think Thanksgiving. So we made our borax snowflakes and they were just delighted. And so they like took their pipe cleaners and we talked about like cutting them in thirds. And then for the main pieces of the snowflake, and then if they wanted to add the fancy ends, that would need to be sixths, like cutting a third in half. So like, I think that's what you're asking, of like taking what we're learning and applying it to something. I try to do kind of a project like that that's pretty hands-on and fun and artistic, or kind of engineering-y with each unit. So it's not all the time, but it is there. Is your library book collection supporting the curriculum you're teaching? Yes. So I would say both directly and indirectly. So like sometimes teachers will say, I want to read this book aloud in class. Do we have it? And I will say either yes and bring it to them, or no, I'll order it. And then it'll become a library book. And same with book sets for like book clubs. If there's a new book out and they're doing it's a fantasy and we're doing a fantasy unit, we'll get 5 copies of it for that book club. And then we'll probably use it the next 2 years down the road as well, if it goes well. Our library, there's just a really big focus on social justice in our school, and therefore also in our library collection, and representation. And so that's sort of like not the curriculum, but the hidden curriculum is very much supported in that, or at least as that's my goal. I don't know if that quite answered the question.
You mentioned that you have a number of tutors right now. Will you continue to have that tool as things sort of, I don't want to say return to normal, but become more similar in some ways to what we're used to?
Ken, do you want to answer that one? It's kind of 2 different things. There are Title I tutors from outside of school that Ken can talk more about. And then specialists like myself and the PE specialists and the music specialists have kind of taken on a tutoring role when they're not teaching specialist classes, when the kids are remote, when the kids are not there, as well as some of our teaching assistants. So I'm guessing, and I don't know that this is totally known, that will decrease just because of the structure when we're back in person, except at the same time, then they're in person. So like they have better access to small group support from me or Sharon, just fewer different people available probably, but Ken can speak to the Title I side of things.
Well, I would just, I would also add that a lot of the specific tutoring we're doing right now is actually really in response to the context we're currently in. So we have, because we've been in a blended model, at least grades K through 5. Our early childhood kids have been in school 5 days in person, but because we've been doing a blended model with the other grades, the school made a decision to leverage other teaching staff, whether they be teaching assistants or, as Katie mentioned, specialist teachers, to provide some of that one-to-one tutoring work to really support kids, because they're not in person as much, and really targeting that. To what extent our tutoring program will look similar or different in the fall, I think that will continue to be planned and thought about. One of the things I really appreciate about this school community is it's a really responsive community. We're always really paying attention to not only what's working, but what's not working and what needs to happen in this particular moment in time we're in. And I think, that tutoring work or that tutoring initiative definitely was in response to the moment we're in with COVID. In terms of the tutoring that maybe comes out of Title I don't know, Sharon, you might be actually better able to answer that, because I don't have a good sense of how many students are actually receiving those services. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the director of student services would be the one to coordinate those services and work with the families and the outside services to bring that in. But I don't know much beyond that.
I could just add a little bit about it. Title I services, students need to qualify for those based on both their academic standing and where they live. There's a geographic part of it too. And then in a normal year, I feel like we keep saying in a normal year, there is a Title I tutor who is assigned to Giddens School, and he or she would be coming into the building and working with kids. Here right now, they're working remotely, which makes sense. And that will continue in the future. But that is something that students would need to qualify for. So it's different than kind of what we can put together.
Oh, and you also mentioned that each of the grades, or tell me if I have this right or not, that each grade has a separate math teacher. Is the intention going forward for that piece to continue? I'm just trying to understand what aspect of the education is blended and what aspect is separated by grade.
I can take that, Ken, is that okay? It is almost completely blended, typically. Math is the only thing that isn't, and that was before COVID. So part of my job has always been teaching whatever math grade level group is needed. So for example, like we have 3 second and third grade teachers. So in a typical year, that would mean that 2 of them teach second grade math, and 1 of them plus me each teaches third grade math, and I'm needed to kind of make that even and make that class size still nice and small for the third grade. Does that make sense? So it's really kind of a numbers thing because math is just that content area that doesn't really work blended very well.
Okay.
Yeah, this year also, because of COVID, there are more grade levels that are separated. So typically K1s are together, and this year there's a 2 kinders and a first, and that was just literally based on like the dimensions of each room and numbers of kids, so but typically mostly blended except for math.
Other questions, things that people are wondering about? Well, we've really enjoyed you, again, taking some time out of your busy schedules to spend a little time with us and learn about another aspect of our program. I am recording all of these for families to go back and use as a resource. And of course, for families that weren't able to join this event, and those will all live on our website. And we have a few more of these virtual meetups as part of this series, and we'll conclude with a virtual meet with our head of school, Morva McDonald, and I certainly hope that you're able to join for that one, and or view it later as a recording. But again, thank you very much, and thank you, Katie and Sharon, for being here to talk about the work you're doing, the great work you're doing at Get in School. And have a great night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.